The entire western United States is facing a really critical water shortage. Most of the West is in what we would regard as severe drought conditions. And in some places like the Colorado River Basin, it's unlike anything we've ever seen. This is, according to scientists, the worst multi-year drought we've seen in 1,200 years.
When we're talking about water shortages, we're talking about supply and demand. When the supply is not enough to meet the demand, whatever the demand may be, obviously potable water, drinking water is of the utmost importance, but it's also important in the agriculture community, in the manufacturing community, and it's something we have to take into consideration.
Some of it is natural. The western United States, is a Mediterranean climate that is arid and prone to years of water shortfall, and also there can be big water years. But climate change has really thrown a monkey wrench in all of it. The weather patterns and systems just don't behave the way they used to. And most of the climate models have been predicting this for years, that we were going to see longer and more extreme droughts. We were also going to see more violent storms and extreme floods when we do have those wet years.
Especially out west, it's cyclical. They may have times, in 2017, they had too much rain, and the dams were about to burst because of the pressure of the water that was backed up there. And that's certainly, a cycle that we go through. The cycle that we're going through right now is just the opposite. We haven't had enough rain, not enough snowfall, so there's not the snow melting off the mountains. But it can be caused by a number of things.
It's really wreaking havoc in many parts of the United States, the Colorado River Basin in particular. So you've got all of these basin states, from Colorado, Utah, Nevada, California, Arizona, that have built their water assumptions and their systems around these hydrologic records that look backward. They look at the past 100 years, and they've entered into an interstate compact that very carefully meters out how much each state gets from the Colorado River Basin. And what we've learned in the last 15 or 20 years is that basin is just not as wet as we once thought it was. The basic hydrology has changed, and that's caused chaos and extreme hardship.
Particularly on our ag community, because if they don't have water to irrigate their crops, then obviously they're not going to be able to grow those crops. And, when you're talking about the ag community, you're talking about jobs there. That has an impact on our community. It'll result in an increase in the price of agricultural products, which has an impact on our community, on our economy, all of those things.
Usually water management is left up to each individual state, and the federal government doesn't play much of a role. In California, we do have some large federal water projects, and they have to kind of coordinate with state authorities, but it's largely deference to the state. It's different, though, in the Colorado River Basin because that system crosses multiple state lines. And so there is a federally recognized interstate compact that governs what each state can and cannot do with this water, and also has some provisions that apply in critical drought situations where you have these sort of shortage triggers that get implemented, and cutbacks are definitely underway right now.
Now, on the west part of Georgia, the western part of Georgia, there was a separate water war going on, and that was on the Chattahoochee and Flint rivers in the Flint River Basin. And the state of Alabama and the state of Florida sued the state of Georgia because Lake Lanier in northeast Georgia, which is the main source of drinking water for the city of Atlanta, they were using so much of that water for Lake Lanier that there wasn't enough for the farmers in Alabama and enough for the area in Florida. And Florida and Alabama sued the state of Georgia to decrease the amount of water that they could use from Lake Lanier. Well, it's pretty much resolved, but there's still more to go in that lawsuit. And that took years. It's been a lot of money on behalf of the state.
We have individual choices we make at the most basic level, but then there's also bigger sort of system-wide efficiencies that only governments can really take care of. And there I'm talking about things like, whether the canals and conveyance systems that move large volumes of water are lined, whether they have something over them to prevent evaporative loss, whether you have pipes that are leaking. In most municipal water systems, the leakage rate can be 10% or more. We can't afford to let that happen. If you're going to get at these infrastructure efficiencies, certainly a government solution is going to be necessary. And that's really where the government mostly comes into play with conservation, is programs that give rebates, financial incentives for people to maybe swap out older appliances and devices with more modern ones that can get by with a lot less water.
Yes, there are things that we can do and things that we can do better to manage water and conservancy. And certainly being aware of the amount of water that you're using. That is, and the amount of water that's being wasted. A lot of water just flows right into the ocean. Well, we got to make sure that we're building reservoirs, make sure that we're keeping that water for future use. That's important. Now, environmentalists and others will make the argument, well, that water going into the ocean serves a purpose, and it does. We understand that. That was one of the primary objectives of the Georgia, Florida, Alabama case, was the amount of water, fresh water, that was coming into the peninsula there in Florida, and therefore impacting the mussels and the seafood in that area. So all of that's got to be taken into consideration. But again, the two major factors are making sure that we have potable water for our citizens and for our ag community.